So a thriller, a dystopian western, a speculative fiction book, and a historical fiction with a strong nature theme written as an epistolary novel. That is what I read this past week, amongst other things, and I want to share these 4 great books with you right now. Hi, I'm Kim, and this is An Oasis of Books, and I am definitely what would be considered an eclectic reader in the sense that I love all sorts of genres of books. I read so widely. Sometimes I'll fall into a phase where I'm reading one genre more than another. Sometimes I do that purposely for a project like I am right now with certain history projects I'm doing, or my Charlotte Bronte study I'm doing, or even my cozy rereads. But sometimes, more often, I just stumble into, a little binge reading of this or that genre occasionally. But by and large, overall, I read eclectically week to week, month to month, all year round. And I like that. I love, reading from a variety of authors, a variety of styles, and a variety of content. There's very few genres I don't read. But, last week, I was sort of hit by a whim that I just wanted to do something different. And at the same time, I was watching a few of my favorite booktubers and just some new random booktubers that I'm not even sure I remember their names at this point. I need to go back and look in my watch history to figure it out. And I came across some books that sounded like just what I was looking for. A little break, a little excitement, a little pause between all my projects. And yeah, I took off with that and ran and had such a blast. The first book I read was a thriller, and I got this recommendation from Tiffany over at the Beach Bum Bookworm. And that's kind of funny because Tiffany's channel is all about cozy mysteries, super cozy mysteries, with a slight little bit of cozy romance now and then. But she did a video recently where she described getting some suggestions from some of her fellow booktubers who were thriller experts, as she put it, and she told them she wanted to read some thrillers. She was in the mood for it, but they couldn't be too scary and they couldn't be too gory. And because they knew her, they gave her some great suggestions. And then at the end of that video, she threw out, I don't remember, 6, 7, 8 options for her viewers, including me, to vote on to give her 2 more books that sounded like she would like. Well, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 or 4 of the books that I found in that video sounded like, right up my alley. One of the ones she threw out herself that I voted for was The Night Shift by Alex Finlay. The premise of the book, the blurb she read from the back, it all sounded very intriguing and just something I probably would really enjoy. So I immediately got it out on Libby and started reading it that night, and it was excellent. So The Night Shift was published in 2022, and apparently Alex Finlay has several other great thrillers out there. I haven't read any yet, but I'm thinking I probably will now because I did love this book. The Night Shift actually has 2 different crimes, but they're interconnected. Or are they? That is the big mystery. The first set of crimes happened in 1999 on New Year's Eve, Y2K, and it happened at a Blockbuster Video. You remember those? I do. So at the store, it's night shift, the crew is closing, and it's 4 teenage girls and their late 20s manager. And, he's trying to corral them and get them to be responsible and do what they're supposed to do, and they all end up getting murdered. All of them except one girl, Ella. She survives. The next group of murders happens 15 years later and is eerily similar. It happens at an ice cream shop where there are 4 teenage girls working, and the attack comes, and once more, everyone is murdered except one survivor. A girl named Jessie, who was sort of a problematic youth in foster care. Problematic, in my opinion, simply because she had a bit of an attitude. But the main characters of this book are 3, and we are told the story from all 3 of their viewpoints. And originally I thought that might be too much for me. I don't even tend to like dual viewpoint books, but you know what? Finlay did a great job. We get the perspective of Ella, the survivor of the first murder. She is now, as an adult, a therapist who specializes in helping people who have survived traumatic events. She is called to talk to Jesse, the survivor of this second incident. And this is when we begin to surmise, to figure out that there are connections. The second perspective we're given in the book is of a FBI agent, Sarah Keller. She's 8.5 months pregnant with twins, and there were a few points in the story where I was like, how is she doing that if she's 8.5 months pregnant with twins? But I really like the character. Finlay did a good job developing all these characters pretty well. And I've heard that she is actually in a few of his other books, even though they're not technically sequels or prequels or anything. And so I'd love to find the books she's in because I really liked her. So we get her perspective. And then the third perspective is from Chris, who is a public defense attorney. And he ends up getting assigned to Jesse, who eventually gets actually accused of the murders in the second incident. Now, the thing about Chris is, no one knows this, but he is the younger brother of the young man who was accused of the first murders, Victor. Now, Victor disappeared shortly after being arrested and has never been found, so no one is sure that he actually did those murders, but it's kind of assumed. Now, Chris ended up lucking out because when the police were investigating the first murders, they, of course, were talking to him at the time. They found signs of serious abuse, so they took him out of the home, put him in foster care. He was adopted by a great couple, so he actually grew up the rest of his, childhood from like 11 years old on in a good situation and became a lawyer. But he changed his name and no one knows who he really is. Now, he doesn't think his brother Victor did that first crime, and also he thinks he's found his brother, and he's sort of following him online in a very intriguing way. The author has brought into the book where he actually features a YouTube channel occasionally. So that was unexpected and interesting. So overall, I found this a great read. It was not too gory. It was not too scary. It was just exciting and a real page turner. I did not want to put it down until I got to the end and had figured out everything that actually happened and what all those connections were. And like I said, now I want to go out and read Alex Finlay's other thrillers too. So the second book I want to tell you about is Upright Women Wanted. It's a dystopian Western that was published in 2020, written by Sarah Gailey. Now, this book was a finalist for several prestigious awards. It was a Best of 2020 pick by NPR and a top 10 science fiction / fantasy book by the American Library Association. I never heard of it until last week. And then a few different booktubers talked about it, and I said, wow, that sounds like I need to read that book right away. It just sounded very enticing. So I grabbed it again off of Libby and started in. Let me tell you, the setting is so realistic. Being from the west of the US myself, I can vouch for it. It is set in Arizona as the wagons travel toward Utah, very desert-like. You can feel the heat, you can feel the dryness, you can feel the barrenness. But this is not the Old West. This is not the pioneer days. This is a near future US, a dystopian US. This is a US that has a fascist government that has complete control of its people. War is constant, and apparently it's been going on for quite some time. People are living on extreme rations, and the government controls everything. So all things that you would consume, like reading material, visual, watching material, everything has to be approved by the government. And the punishments for breaking any laws are extremely severe, as in pretty much you get hanged. So whether you were trying to assassinate a political figure, or just were sharing your rations because you felt sorry for someone, or were caught maybe reading something that wasn't pre-approved by the government, you were likely to get hanged. And that is exactly what happens to our main character, Esther's friend. And as we quickly find out, more than a friend, because Esther and she had a little thing going on. And, of course, that's not approved by the government either, against the law also. So when this happens, when she's forced to watch this hanging along with the whole town, and across from her is her fiance, which is, by the way, an arranged marriage that her father, an important political figure in the community, set up, this older gentleman that Esther wants nothing to do with, Esther makes the choice to leave. She runs away and hides out in the librarian's wagon as they are leaving town. Now, the librarians are known to be the most upright, law-abiding examples of great people to all the common people. And Esther thinks, if I can spend my summer with them and I can emulate them and become more like them, then I will do away with these bad tendencies I have. I'll become a better person. And so that's her plan. She's discovered pretty quickly on the trail by the librarians, and she quickly discovers, as you will know when you read the back blurb of the book, so it's not a spoiler, these librarians are not quite what she thought they were. In fact, they're revolutionaries. They're anti-fascist rebels. And the ones who happen to be in this wagon happen to be in a relationship. And Esther has a whole lot of new things to learn. And again, as they travel across the desert, distributing approved materials, as far as Esther knows, to these different small towns, and as she gets to know them, she slowly discovers that things are not what she thought in the world, and certainly not what she'd been brainwashed to believe. And the setting remains consistently accurate, and the characters are, in such a short book, developed pretty well. Plus, there is Western action. There's gunfights. There's chases by the law. It was all a very fun, quick, exciting read. And the only quibble I had with this book was it ended a bit abruptly, and it seems like the people that read it were thinking maybe the author, Sarah Gailey, was going to write a sequel at some point, but it's 5 years later and she hasn't, so I'm a little disappointed. But yeah, if you're in the mood for a Western that is not traditional, but yet still gives Western vibes, along with LGBTQIA plus representation, this might be something for you. Also, I saw a clip, and I'll put it in the description below the YouTube channel I saw it on, of some librarians in some Midwestern town who did the funniest advertisement based off of this book. They were in costume, Old West costumes, and they just had a good time and made a great ad for their library. And if you want to go check it out, I'll put the link below. So 2 down and 2 to go, and the next 2 were the best. So I've got How to Stop Time by Matt Haig, published in 2018. This was such a great book. Speculative fiction, and right at the beginning, the main character, Tom Hazard, tells you he's over 400 years old because he has this condition, you see. And we go back and forth in time and see different parts of his life. He was born just after the turn of the 17th century, so very early 1600s, and he's only had one meaningful, really, relationship in his life, and it was when he was young, just come of age, and he did have a love relationship at that time with Rose. But of course that couldn't last now, could it? Because one of the big downsides, as Tom has figured out, of having anageria, as he calls it, the very, very slow aging process where for every 14 years of a normal person's life, he only ages 1 year. That condition means that he outlives everybody. So, like everyone else, Rose is long gone from his life, and so too is his daughter that he had with Rose. He has now found life pretty meaningless at the point we enter the book. Even hints of giving up on life altogether. But this is going to be difficult for him because he belongs to the Albatross Society, or Albas for short. And there's a man in charge of the Albatross Society, Henrik, who's like 900 years old or something. And he's really, well, very bossy and insists on lots of rules. And the main thing is he's paranoid about scientists, especially now as we've moved into, such advanced technology, getting a hold of them and experimenting on them and using their cells in all sorts of nefarious ways. So he insists that all the albas move around regularly, like every 7 or 8 years, which of course prevents them from establishing any kind of true, long-lasting friendships, let alone any other kind of relationships. Of course, that's another rule. Don't fall in love. So we find Tom not sure what he wants to do, but at this point he realizes if he can't die, if he's just going to live for another 300, 400, 500 years or something, then he has to have some sort of meaning. And so instead of picking one of the fantastical futures that Henrik says he can set him up with, like he does every 8 years, he chooses to become a teacher, a history teacher of middle grade kids. And he actually starts enjoying that and meets someone interesting. But of course, he doesn't want to get serious because he knows where that would lead. The overarching goal of his life, and has been for a long time, is to find his daughter Marion. On the off chance that she has his genes, is also an Alba, he's hoping she's still alive and that one day he can find her. And so he long ago enlisted Henrik's help with all of his, worldwide connections to try to find his daughter, but no luck so far. So this book, very, very interesting as it goes back and forth in time. We see many different periods of Tom Hazard's life. And although some famous people do show up, like Shakespeare, mostly it is the common people and their common life that we are exposed to. And that I just found truly enjoyable. I will say that the ending seemed a little bit rushed to me. Like the pace of the whole book was fantastic until the very end, and it was a little rushed. But other than that, I loved this book. And now I'm going to finally get around to reading the other Matt Haig books that have been on my TBR forever. So I'm really glad that I followed the recommendation to read this one. So I'm so glad you stuck with me to the end, because now I'm going to share with you my favorite book that I read this past week. And it is a 5+ star rating from me. I don't usually give star ratings, but this book was so good, and not in a flashy way, just in a really deep, true way. It is Letters from Yellowstone by Diane Smith, published in 1999. Now you can tell what a great book this is by the praise that is being heaped on it from so many respected writers, including Larry McMurtry, author of Lonesome Dove, the ultimate Western. He says this is a beautifully written and highly original first novel. It's been a long time since I've read a first book that pleased me more. And I totally agree with him. Now, this book takes place in Yellowstone National Park in 1898. And while Native Americans lived and traveled through this area for 10, 11,000 years before the time of this book, the Americans, who were recent immigrants from Europe mostly, who lived in the eastern part of the United States, they didn't really pay much attention to this area over here, and didn't officially seriously explore it until the late 1860s, after the Civil War was over. At that point, they realized how gorgeous it was, based on the sketches and paintings that were sent back by artists who accompanied the explorers, and they realized how many resources were out there, and right away people began campaigning. Competing people began campaigning, as in the capitalists who wanted to exploit the resources and make money, and the ecologists who wanted to protect the park. In fact, even the military, who was out there doing the initial surveys and such, who really weren't especially focused on nature, realized how special the area was and stood fully behind protecting the area. So this really was the beginning of the environmentalism movement here in the US. And so this area, about 3,500 square miles or 9,000 square kilometers, which is mostly in the northwest part of Wyoming, although a little bit up into Montana and Idaho, It became the first federally protected national park in the United States in 1872. So Letters from Yellowstone, as the title implies, is an epistolary novel. I don't read a lot of them, and I used to think I didn't really like them, but I have had my mind changed by a few books, including 84 Charing Cross Road, and now this one for sure. Excellent, interesting, engaging, gorgeous writing. The research Diane Smith put into this is clear, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it is so well done, so accurate, and so attention grabbing. It is a slower paced book. It's got a cozy, warm feel to it. You don't need to rush through it. You want to sit back and snuggle up with it and enjoy it. That's how I felt anyway. Now, the letters are from a variety of people. For the most part, they're from our main character, A.E. Bartram, which stands for Alexandria, although she goes by Alex. She was training to be a medical student, but by nature and by her life skills and experience, she is a botanist. She's a nature-loving, extremely talented botanist. So Alex is thrilled to be able to join a field study run by a professor, Professor Merriam, from a nearby Montana college, there in Yellowstone in the spring and summer of 1898. She knows it's going to be wonderful. She knows it's going to be life-changing, but she's not really prepared just how much that is actually going to be true. And in this book, we meet all sorts of characters because Diane Smith does a wonderful job of showing how the power of nature, the beauty of nature, the allure of nature, the benefits of nature are just as strong, just as important to everyone, to amateurs as well as professionals who study nature. And so those people enter into this book as well. There are a lot of women in this book, surprisingly, and that is accurate historically too, though I wasn't aware of that till I read this book. And the people that are in the camp, very, very different from each other. You know, they all have their own individual reasons to be there and their own individual focuses, but they all have things in common too. And slowly they learn what those are, and slowly they become, as they call themselves by the end of the book, a science clan. I really liked the main characters of Alex and the professor, but I also really, really liked all the minor characters. Smith did a fabulous job, in my opinion, on developing the characters. These were not people that were presented in one way and then stayed stagnant throughout the book. They actually grew in very observable, measurable ways over the course of those months from May through September. And you got to see that happening with the letters that the professor wrote to his mom and the letters he wrote to his colleague back at the Smithsonian, and through Alex's letters to her friend Jessie, to her parents, to her colleagues back at Cornell, and even from some of the others. We saw a few letters which showed a lot of humor, a lot of insight into their character that the reader was able to glean that maybe some of the other characters in the book hadn't yet figured out. This is all set against a backdrop of political intrigue as the railroads and the people related to them are trying to encroach into the park, doing their best to get their foot in the door as soon as they can, and the scientists and the educators and even the cavalry who's there right then protecting the park, they're fighting back. This book shone light on the progressing role of women scientists, especially in relation to nature. It looked at Native American displacement and the effects that was having. It brought up the issues with tourism and capitalism, both the good ones and the bad ones, as our national park system was just getting started. And it showed how hope is always what sees us through the hard times. This book had a very surprising ending to me. I thought from the way I was reading the book, the pace of the book, the tone of the book, that I could see the ending ahead of time, but I did not. And I did really like the ending. So the only thing I didn't like about the ending is I wanted more. And I don't think there's ever going to be more. But I would really love to follow these fascinating characters further down the road in each of their lives. Diane Smith, if you're out there, write another one. In fact, I immediately, after finishing this book, went online and searched out, did she write a sequel? She did not, but she does have another book that seems quite similar. I ordered that one. And I also then, you know how you do, I went and found some other women naturalist books from the early days in America. And I'm looking forward to those arriving here soon. So thanks for being here for this video, and I urge you, no matter how big your TBR pile is, no matter how many projects and readathons you've got going on, occasionally take a break and follow an impulse. On a whim, read a book that just seems so compelling to you. You might just love it, like I did with all of these. I sure hope that you'll read 1, 2, 3, maybe all 4 of these, because I think you'll probably enjoy them. So until next time, I'm wishing you the same kind of happy reading that I've had this past week. Take care.